It's not. It's too icy for him.
Hello, YouTubes. What is up? Welcome back. It is your boy Strem here, and today I have a new type of video coming at you. I will be giving my official ranking of all 151 Generation 1 Pokemon. I thought this would be a fun little thing to do and slightly different from our normal Let's Play videos on this channel. So I got my friend Bill Oney to help advise me during this process. To make sure it wasn't just my personal preference of which Pokemon were graded, we put a little twist on it, and the Pokemon were graded on 3 separate categories. They got a score for power, a score for relevance, and then finally the design score. The score for power was calculated on base stats purely. Each Pokemon was placed into a tier and then given a grade out of 5 for their base stats. Next, the Pokemon were scored on relevance, which was our opinion on how much of an impact each individual Pokemon had on the entire franchise as a whole. This was also scored out of 5. And lastly, the Pokemon had a design score, which is where my personal preference comes in. It was graded out of 10 on how much I like that Pokemon's look, style, personality, and just overall how much I like the Pokemon. So I guess we can just get right into it. Coming in at number 151, the lowest Pokemon on the list was unfortunately our boy Drowsy. Drowsy scored obviously relatively low in each category with a total score of 6.15. Yeah, I mean, his design score wasn't my lowest out of all the Pokemon. His relevance score was the lowest it could be, and obviously the power score wasn't super high either. So Drowsy is number 151. Coming in at number 150, it is Goldeen with a score of 6.65, so a little bit ahead of Drowsy. Goldeen actually had my lowest design score of all Pokemon, but made up for it in some different categories. Coming in at 149, we have Spearow. Spearow scored a total of 6.75. Spearow was just relatively low across the board. Surprised it came in this low, but that's the game, you know. That's the way it shook out. Spearow had a lower power score than Goldeen and Drowsy, but higher in some of the other categories. Coming in at 148, we have Weedle at a 6.9. Again, really disappointed that Weedle came in this low. It had one of the higher design scores of mine for the lower categories, but ultimately the relevance to the franchise and the power were too much to overcome. Coming in at 147, we have Venonat. Venonat scored a 7.05. Again, just kind of low in each category. Definitely the relevant score brought Venonat down, as well as you know, my design score. Coming in at 146, we have Doduo. Doduo is kind of one of these odd Pokemon that I always forget about. I think most people forget about. Yeah, it just didn't really stand out in any category. It came in with a score of 7.15, slightly ahead of Venonat. Next up on the list, Weedle's bug friend, Caterpie, coming in with a score of 7.3. Caterpie had a relatively high design score for the bottom of the list, but ultimately the low power score and the near no relevance to the overall franchise ended up impacting its results. Coming next at score of 7.35 at 144 was Kakuna. Kakuna, again, a little disappointed to see him down here. I actually like Kakuna a lot, and it had a relatively high design score, but again, low power and low relevance to the franchise really impacted its spot here. Coming in at number 143, we have Shelder. This is an upset, I think, to have Shelder this low. I'm not a huge fan of Shelder. I know there's some in the series that like the Shelder line. And for it to be this low with the amount of power it has in comparison to things like Caterpie, Weedle, and Kakuna is shocking. Coming in at 142, we have Tentacool. Tentacool, again, has a little bit more relevance to the franchise, as it's kind of one of those spammy Pokemon that pops up, you know, every time you're surfing everywhere in the original games. It has a somewhat cool design, but ultimately, you know, the mix of all three is just nowhere near what it could be, so that's why its score is 7.85. Coming in at number 141, we have Nidoran Female at an 8.05. I actually love Nidoran Female's design, so it did score pretty high, but again, The power and relevant score were just too much to overcome here. So 141 is pretty low for Nidoran female, but that's life in the STREM business. And just to let you guys know, I'm going to go pretty fast on these bottom 50, but once we get to the higher numbers, we will have more discussion about the Pokemon, and maybe even break out their scores on screen so you can see them individually. But coming in at number 140, we have Rattata. Rattata's cool. I mean, it has a little bit of a relevance to the game as it is an original Route 1 Pokemon. Shows up a little bit in the anime and stuff like that, but nothing too crazy. I actually like Rattata's design. I like the line, so it has the highest design score yet of any Pokemon we've seen, and that's what boosted it up to the 8.15. But again, ultimately does not escape the bottom 11. Coming in at number 139 with a score of 8.2 is Execute. Execute, yeah, not relevant to the series at all, and that's really what hurt it here, but decent power, and you know, I like the design a little bit, so that's why it escaped the bottom 11 there at 139. Coming in at 138 with a score of 8.25, we have another Route 1 Pokemon in Pidgey. Pidgey has more relevance to the storyline than most things we've seen so far, and the overall franchise, but I don't love the design, and ultimately we know Pidgey is not that powerful in the base stats category, and that's what leaves it at 138. At number 137 with a score of 8.3, slightly higher than Pidgey, we have Seal. Seal's line is really cool. I'm a big fan of Dugong, as you'll see later in this list, but ultimately next to no relevance to the franchise, low power, and it doesn't really get cool until it becomes Dugong. Like, Dugong's got that cool Ice Beam, and Seal just doesn't really have it. Coming in at number 136 with a score of 8.4 is Horsey. Again, one of those ones where I love the line. Like, Siege is really cool, Kingdra's obviously awesome, but there's just not that much relevant or powerful about Horsey, and the design is kind of lackluster. It's a basic Pokemon. I mean, I like seahorses and stuff, but come on, dudes. Coming in at 135, we have Farfetch'd. Now, I think this one might get people a little angry. I like Farfetch'd. Its design score was actually okay. I just don't think it has too much relevance to the franchise, being, you know, a one-stage evolution. It did higher than a lot of the Pokemon up to this point in relevance score, but again, its power is so low. It's such a basic Pokemon. 135, I feel like, is a good slot for it. Coming up at 134 with a score of 8.85, so a little jump here from Farfetch'd is Tangela. Another one that might make some people mad, given as Tangela is somewhat strong. It clearly means it got a low design score from me. I just don't love the look or personality of Tangela. I feel it's kind of boring. Tangrowth is okay, but that doesn't come in until later. Yeah, and overall not super relevant to the franchise, as we know. Coming in at 133, we have Poliwag with an 8.95 score. I really like Poliwag's design for considering it's at the bottom of the list or near bottom. Again, Poliwag just doesn't have a ton of relevance to the overall series, so it's tough to give it a high score there. And being a basic evolution, its power is quite low. Poliwag to this point, just a little inside baseball, has the highest design score of Pokemon to date, up to 133. Coming in at 132, we have Ponyta with a score of 9 flat. Again, I love Ponyta's design. Ponyta is more powerful than most of the Pokemon we've seen to date, but the relevance to the franchise, again, is not huge. I know there's some hardcore Ponyta and Rapidash fans out there, but we're just not, it just wasn't good enough, as you'll see higher up on the list. Coming in at 131 with a score of 9.05, slightly edging out Ponyta, is Nidoran Male, the Poison-type Pokemon. This has a really high design score, actually the highest design score to date. I love the Nidoran line, including Nidorino and Nidoking. Although I admittedly said its relevant score was probably as low as any Pokemon out there, and its power is pretty low. It is in the slot it is simply because of design. Coming in at number 130, we have Diglett, a score of 9.1, again slightly edging out Nidoran Male. Diglett's design score is cool. I think Diglett's cool. I think Dugtrio's cool. It obviously has more relevance to the franchise than some Pokemon, albeit, like, you know, it's always memed, and, you know, there's always just this mystery behind Diglett. I feel like it was popular in the original season of the anime as well, but ultimately not very powerful and not a excellent design. Coming in at number 121, we have Oddish with a score of 9.2. Oddish has a cool design. I like the Oddish line. Clearly, Oddish itself, no real relevance at all to the franchise as a whole. Not super powerful either. Slightly more powerful than Diglett, and that's really what made it edge Diglett out here at 129. Coming in at 128, we have Slowpoke with a score of 9.25. This one might make some people mad. I love Slowpoke. I think he's cute. I think he's cool. But ultimately, the design doesn't hold up as much as it did in Generation 1 today. It has some relevance to the story and the overall franchise. I think Slowpoke, you know, has been memed a lot. Slowpoke is a generally popular Pokemon. It has multiple evolutions. It has a Mega Evolution. You know, there's a Slowpoke Well in Generation 2. And it's at least powerful than some of the Pokemon, more powerful than some of the Pokemon we've come across to this point. Coming in at 127 with a score of 9.35 is Jinx. So there's obviously some controversy around Jinx. I ultimately gave Jinx a pretty low design score. Although it is powerful, I don't think Jinx has a super relevance to the franchise today, you know, aside from the controversies that exist with Jinx in the past. Coming in at 126, we have Lickitung, actually tied with a score of 9.35 with Jinx. I decided to put it ahead in this list because that's who I am. Yeah, I mean, I like Lickitung's design more than Jinx, although I believe it is less relevant to the franchise than Jinx is, and slightly less powerful than Jinx, actually. Coming in at number 125 with a score of 9.45 is Metapod. Metapod is extremely weak to be this high on the list, but I really like Metapod's design. I think it's the highest we've come across to date in the design score column, which obviously has a heavy weight. It was a little relevant, I think, in the franchise. I mean, Ash had a Metapod that evolved early on, you know, all the hardened memes and stuff like that. It still didn't get a huge design or relevant score, but it deserves to be 125, I think. Coming in at 124 with a score of 9.55, we have Meowth. Now, Meowth is an interesting one when you look at the data of all the Pokemon scores, because it obviously has a really high design score. I mean, Meowth is the only Pokemon that talks, I meant relevant score, not design score. But it's the only Pokemon that talks in the anime. You know, Team Rocket has a Meowth the entire time through the anime, the talking Meowth. I mean, I think it's just really relevant to the franchise. I think the whole line is, although I don't really love Meowth's design, and obviously Meowth is not a super strong Pokemon, so that's why he kind of slips to 124. Number 123 with a score of 9.6 is Paris. Not much to say about Paris. I think Paris is super cute. He's, you know, bug poison, I believe, and that's bug grass, sorry, and bug is my favorite type of Pokemon pretty much. So he got a high design score, but nothing really notable in any other category. Coming in at 122, this might cause some controversy with a score of 9.8 is Kabuto, a fossil Pokemon. So obviously there's a little bit relevance to the franchise with it being one of the first fossil Pokemon that you are able to catch in the games, but ultimately, you know, not a super cool design. It's okay. It gets cooler at Kabutops, but yeah, and not mega strong either, so it comes in at 122. Coming in at number 121, we have a score of 9.85, Clefairy. I think Clefairy is pretty relevant to the franchise. I mean, most Pokemon fans know that Clefairy actually had a shot to be used in the anime as opposed to Pikachu. It was used in the manga. Obviously, there's the whole Mount Moon and Moonstone stuff that comes along with Clefairy. But ultimately, I'm not super impressed with the design. It's a middle-of-the-road design score and a middle-of-the-road power score, which puts it at 121. Coming in at number 120, we have Fearow. So Fearow's an interesting one here, too. It's got a relatively high design score from me. I mean, almost a 5 out of 10 for some inside baseball there. and it's powerful to be this low on the list, but unfortunately the relevance of Firo in the overall franchise is quite low. I feel it's often forgotten and has done really not much significant in the anime or rest of the franchise at all. Coming in at 119 with a score of 10. This one may cause some controversy too. It is Ditto. So Ditto is not very powerful. It's kind of got a middle of the road to low design score from me. And ultimately, although it's cool, it transforms. Everybody loves Ditto. People would know Ditto. I don't think it has a major impact on the franchise. I mean, it got a decent score for sure, but not as high as Meowth per se. So I know there's some Ditto fans out there, but 118 is where he ends up on this list. Sorry, 119. Coming in at number 118 is Venomoth. So I really like Venomoth. I think it's cool. Bug Poison is a cool typing for me. It's pretty strong, so it got a good power score. It's just not relevant to the franchise at all. That's what really knocked it down this far. Aside from that, it did really well. Coming in at number 117, we have Porygon, 10.35, so a little jump up there from Venomoth. Porygon's cool, man. Porygon was just kind of an interesting one too, because he's kind of middle of the road power, middle of the road relevance to the franchise. I know, there were some events going on around Porygon. He was the first kind of digital-esque Pokemon, which was cool. Definitely had an impact. He got some evolves in later generations. And I think his design is okay. So that's why he ended up at 117. Coming in at 116 with a 10.35 again, tied with Porygon, is Mankey. So I gave Mankey a fairly high design score, the highest to date on our list. Not super high in terms of the Pokemon on the top of the list, but definitely one of the higher ones on the bottom of the list. Obviously, therefore, where it suffers is Mankey is not very powerful, and Mankey, I don't believe, is relevant to the franchise at all. So yeah. Coming in at 115 is Psyduck with a score of 10.4. So I like Psyduck's design. It's not great. Psyduck is fairly relevant to the franchise as it is Misty's Pokemon. It has a pretty big role in Detective Pikachu and things like that. It's always been a fan favorite, but not that powerful, not that cool of a design in my mind. So 115. Coming in at number 114 is Magikarp with a 10.4, tied with Psyduck. Pretty much the exact same design score as Psyduck. More relevant, I think, to the franchise than Psyduck is. This might be argued, but that's kind of where we netted out in the relevant score. I mean, Magikarp evolves into Gyarados. Everybody loves Magikarp. When Pokemon Go came out, everybody was spamming catching Magikarp to evolve into their Gyarados. I mean, I just think Magikarp is slightly more relevant to the franchise than Psyduck. And then where he lost to Psyduck was in the power category. So he is 114 on our list. Coming in at number 113 with a score of 10.45, we have Dratini. So I gave Dratini a really high design score, even higher than Mankey's, to reference a few Pokemon ago. However, Dratini doesn't have a big relevance to the franchise or a big impact, and the power score is kind of middle of the road as well. Doesn't really get that spike until Dragonair, so it is 114. 113. Coming in at number 112 is Zubat. So this was interesting. Zubat, I like Zubat a lot. Some people are frustrated with Zubat. I think it has a higher impact on the franchise than Dratini, as it's kind of that Pokemon that always spams you when you don't want it to. It's always top of mind. Brock had one in the anime. It's just there. Zubat is there. It uses Supersonic. It confuses you, and it gets you. And then obviously the power score is not high, but surprisingly not mega low either. Coming in at number 111 is Machop with a score of 10.6. I like Machop's design. I don't think Machop is mega relevant to the franchise. It is what it is. I think its power score and its design score definitely saved it here. Coming in at number 110 with also a score of 10.6 is Bellsprout. So I love Bellsprout's design as much as I love Machop's. We found Bellsprout and Machop to be of equal relevance to the franchise, and believe it or not, Bellsprout and Machop had similar base stats to the point where they were in the same tier, so they netted out at the exact same score. I made the call to put Bellsprout ahead of Machop because why not? Coming in at number 109 with a score of 10.75 is Mr. Mime. I don't love Mr. Mime's design. It is more powerful than I thought it was in terms of base stats, and its relevance to the franchise is obviously high. I mean, a huge role in the Detective Pikachu movie. It is one of the first humanoid Pokemon, and it lives with Ash Ketchum's mom. As we all know, we don't really know what's going on there with them, but we know that it's a thing. Coming in at number 108, we have Magnemite with a score of 10.8. I like Magnemite's design a lot. That's really the story here. I think Magnemite's cute as shit. I think it's interesting for its time. I think, it just got really cool. Not very relevant to the franchise, so it would have been higher had it been, but that's where Magnemite lost his points. Coming in at number 107, we have, with a score of 10.9, we have Slowbro. Slowpoke's evolved form. Again, this Slowbro wasn't as relevant to the franchise as Slowpoke, obviously, but way more powerful, and I gave it a higher design score, so that's why it is so many spots ahead of Slowpoke. Coming in at 106 with a score of 10.95, maybe a little bit of controversy here, we have Kangaskhan. I actually gave Kangaskhan quite a high design score, not very high, but not low. Kangaskhan is powerful in comparison to a lot of the Pokemon below it on this list. And it is fairly relevant to the franchise, although, there's all those Kangaskhan and Cubone rumors that float around, and I feel like it's just kind of hung around in people's memories. But ultimately, it was mediocre in all categories, and therefore ended up at 106. Coming in at 105 with also a score of 10.95 is Grimer. I like Grimer. I think it's a little bit, tiny bit relevant to the franchise, as it's kind of like, just around. I think it was interesting as a garbage Pokemon that came out in the first games and in the anime. I think it was just kind of hanging around, and I don't think people forget it, but still a really low relevant score compared to some Pokemon, obviously, as Grimer is not super relevant. The reason it's in the 105 spot is because I love its design. Coming in at number 104 with a score of 11.05 is Rhyhorn. Same thing here. It netted out a little bit more than Grimer simply because of its power score, but everything else kind of is even with Grimer for relevant, or for a little reference point there. Coming in at 103 with a score of 11.05 is Nidorina, the female Nidorina line, second evolution. I love this Pokemon. It was tough for me to see it come out this low because I had to give it a relatively low relevant score, as it doesn't really have any impact on the franchise at all. Its power kind of saved it, where it's kind of medium power, and I gave it kind of a medium design score, although I do love the Pokemon. Coming in at number 102, we have Butterfree with a score of 11.1. Butterfree's relevance to the anime, I think, is really why I gave it a somewhat higher relevant score than most. I think people remember Butterfree. I think people find Butterfree endearing. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I did give it a relatively high relevant score. I mean, again, I'm relative to the bottom of the list, not to the top of the list. I don't love its design. I don't hate its design, so it was dead in the middle on design score, and then it has decent base stats. Coming in next, we have, with a score of 11.1, tied with Butterfree, we have Krabby. So the reason I put Krabby ahead on this list is because I like its design more. I think Krabby's very cool. Where it kind of lost out to Butterfree was the relevance to the franchise. Although Ash catches a Krabby, and so does Gary in Season 1 of the anime, I still think overall Krabby can't sometimes be forgotten about. And last for this episode, since we're only doing 151 to 100 in this episode, coming in with a score of 11.15 is Staryu. Staryu, you know, Misty had a Staryu. It's in the second gym of the games. It's in the animes. I think it's a unique Pokemon, so it has somewhat relevance to the franchise for sure. I don't love its design. Again, it's kind of like Butterfree, where it's just kind of middle of the road, and it was surprisingly strong in base stats for a basic Pokemon, so that's what brings it all the way up to 100. So if you enjoyed this video, please subscribe. We'll do the next 50 in the next video. Then after that, we will slow it down a little bit for maybe the top 10 or something like that. Love you guys. Peace.